Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on the return to travel for Kusini to Zimbabwe. I am Tad Bradley from the Kusini Collection, coming to you from Seattle, Washington. I am joined by my colleague Gretchen Healy, also from Kusini in Denver, and Kim Barber from my Globetrotter Travel in Michigan. And we're gonna jump in shortly to our presentation today that we hope will be a pretty interactive one with lots of questions from all of you attending today about the experience that Gretchen and Kim recently had while visiting Zim. Well, looks like a good number of you are streaming in now. If you do have questions, feel free to just enter those into the Q&A or into the chat. We will potentially just field them throughout the webinar, and then we'll have time at the end for further Q&A. Of course, this is being recorded as we always do. So if you miss any of it, you'll be able to watch it in its entirety on our YouTube channel. So don't worry if you have to step away. Hopefully to take a call about sending a traveler to Zimbabwe very soon. Any other housekeeping things I need to point out? I don't think so. I think we'll just jump into to this discussion today. So as I mentioned, Gretchen and Kim recently traveled to Zimbabwe with Imvelo Safari Lodges and New Frontiers. Actually, this is something I do want to give you a little bit of breaking news before we get into the specifics about their trip. I just received this beautiful photo from Mark Butcher, the founder and director of Imvelo Safari Lodges from Hwange. And this is a picture of Little Kariba, which is one of the larger dams or lakes, natural lakes in the southern part of Hwange. And the great news is they've gotten 160 milliliters of rain in the last 5 days. For those of you better at math than me, you can convert that to inches. Little Kariba is 100% full, which has not been 100% full for a number of years. So Kim and Gretchen will undoubtedly talk a little bit about the rain that they had while they were in Zim a few weeks ago, but that was a great harbinger of more rain to come, and knock on wood, it's looking very positive this year with these great early rains. So a great sign, and maybe knock on wood again, twice, a harbinger of better times to come in 2021 for the drought, as well as for the recovery of our industry. So we'll get into the itinerary here. Kim brought a group of 5 plus herself intrepid travelers from Michigan. And we're still amazed and in awe of Kim's efforts of being able to rally this group of 6 of her friends and family to head off to Zim, all 5 of which were first-time Africa travelers. So kudos, round of applause to you, Kim, for that.
Thank you.
Gretchen spent a few extra days in Zim, lucky her, thanks to some well, A, flight challenges, and B, just wanting to spend some more time in Vic Falls. So just briefly, and we'll get into more detail, but they both eventually flew out of Chicago, Gretchen from Denver and Kim from Michigan, flew on the Addis Ababa flight from Chicago, on Ethiopian flight to Addis Ababa from Chicago. Gretchen ended up having to have a little extra time in London due to some flight changes, and then a unscheduled stop in Ndola in Zambia before finally getting to Victoria Falls. Kim had to actually change her flights and flew into Harare instead of Vic Falls because of, again, COVID times and some of the changes that are happening on a daily, hourly basis with the airlines. But eventually they all made it to Zim. Gretchen spent 2 nights in Vic Falls at Alala and Vic Falls Island Lodge, which she'll talk about. And then off to Hwange for 9 nights, 2, 4, 6, 8 nights, excuse me, in Hwange National Park at all 4 of the Imvelo camps, starting with, I have to admit, my favorite camp, Southern Hwange, Jozibanini camp, the most remote camp in Zimbabwe, and then to the southeast corner in the amazing Ngamo Plains, 2 nights at Bomani, 2 nights at Camelthorne Lodge, then taking the Elephant Express, Imvelo's incredible safari train, up to Nahimba Lodge in the north central part of the park for their final 2 nights in Hwange, and then they all went back to Victoria Falls for 1 final night before heading back on Ethiopian, this time a little bit more straightforward, Victoria Falls, back to Addis, on to Chicago, and for Gretchen, then on to Denver, and Kim and her group back to Michigan. So a bit of an odyssey, but that is these times for COVID. We're not going to go into a ton of detail on the Imvelo product. If you're not familiar with their 4 camps in Hwange, you'll get a sense of what they're all about today, but I would be happy to either schedule a separate run through of their properties with you, or I can send you webinars that we've done in the past that go into more detail on all 4 of their properties in Hwange. For those of you that aren't aware, the 2 properties Imvelo previously were operating in Victoria Falls, Gorges, and Zambezi Sands are no longer part of the portfolio, so they are 100% focused now on Hwange National Park, which is what we're going to dive into today. Well, before we get into the kind of nuts and bolts and the COVID top tips from Gretchen and Kim, I just want to first ask Gretchen, just in general, can you sum up what it felt like to be on safari after, I think for you, it was nearly a year away from Africa? What was that feeling like, and how did it hopefully refresh and rejuvenate you?
It was 11 long months. I came back from South Africa late December last year, and was home like everyone else between trips. And getting back to Zimbabwe was the most soul restoring experience, far beyond anything I could have imagined. To be somewhere and feel safe, and to see how organized things were, and then to be in the bush and to hear the sounds and smell the smells and see the sights and all of it, just really refilled my cup. It was much, much needed.
And Kim, how about you?
Yeah, I will echo what Gretchen said. I was fortunate to get to Uganda earlier this year before everything shut down, so it hadn't been quite as long, but yeah, I mean, it was just after a year spent mostly inside. Obviously summer was a little bit nicer, but it was just great to spend 10, 11 days outdoors in the bush. And it was it refilled my cup also. It was a much needed getaway.
I don't have to remind you, and this will be a theme, and you guys have heard this before from me as well, but now going back through your trip, I'm getting jealous again for your amazing adventures. But let's talk about getting there and the process of preparing for a trip in these times. Gretchen, if you could just talk a little bit about your pre-trip preparation around purchasing PPE, as well as then your process for COVID testing. Now, the big thing with Zim, and we'll, I'm sure, get more questions about this, but currently the requirement for entry is a negative PCR test 48 hours from arrival. So it is a fairly short window, probably one of the shortest of any destinations globally. But the 2 of you, well, all 7 of you, Kim, your group of 6, and Gretchen, you all managed to make it work. But Gretchen, if you could just detail some of your preparation and then talk about your COVID testing process as well.
Sure. So I really went from going nowhere, barely even to the grocery store, to going to Zimbabwe over 8 months. And I knew I wanted to be very prepared in terms of PPE on the airplane. So the first thing I did was get a consumer grade N95 mask. I have a membership to Costco. You can see in the lower right of your screen. I bought 100 of them, thinking like I'll either give some away or use them or whatever it is. Because I've been using reusable cloth masks, and I'm not into disposables, but for taking what at the time was a 40-hour sort of journey across a couple of continents, I really wanted that extra sort of safeguard and protection. The other thing I bought, you'll see just above, is a pair of protective eyewear. They're not prescription glasses. I did want something that would cover my eyes. Not everybody's a fan of Amazon. Necessary evil sometime. I found these online and thought, this is one extra step I can take. And you can see it's got the protective covering both above, along the side, and below the eye. So those were on my face the whole time as well. In addition, of course, hand sanitizer, both in liquid and wipe form, as well as Clorox wipes. I wiped down every single surface I possibly would have been touching near and around and on my seat, any leather surfaces on the seat, that is. And honestly, after the second airplane, I thought, like, why haven't I been traveling like this before? It just makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of people and planes are kind of gross. And I don't think this is something that's going to change post-COVID for me. So that kind of covers the PPE sort of things. In terms of testing, very fortunately, a friend and colleague pointed me towards a group called the COVID Consultants. They happen to be located here in Colorado, in Evergreen. But what they do is mail out a test kit to you, and you can do this well in advance. But they can also get it to you as quickly as, I believe, 24 to 48 hours. You'll pay for the shipping, mind you, but you can get it very quickly. They promise a 24-hour turnaround once they have received the sample that you provide. You can do both nasal or saliva. And I was in a extra interesting situation because I needed the results on Monday. They use FedEx. FedEx doesn't work on Sundays. So I got my kit earlier in the week. I requested it in advance, and then I provided the sample on Saturday, dropped it off at a FedEx site. And Monday, I think they actually probably turned the results around within about 3 to 4 hours. By the time I was on my flight to Chicago, I had the results in email, which I was able to show the gate agent in Chicago. And I would say it was cursory and not terribly detailed. I was not asked for the results in London. And then I was asked again in Zim on arrival in Vic Falls. And I, again, am not entirely certain as to the amount of detail that was paid or attention that was paid to the exact hour of the test. There were lots of other COVID protocol formalities to go through on arrival in addition. So.
And I think that's something that is important to emphasize, is that while there is this requirement 48 hours prior to arrival, there hasn't been any cases that the team at Imvelo or New Frontiers is aware of guests arriving and being scrutinized on their, doing the math, if you will, by the immigration officials as far as their tests go. We do keep expecting this window to be extended to 72 hours to line up with pretty much the rest of Southern Africa, at least with South Africa and Botswana. But it is something, you obviously do want to be very cognizant of it, and to recommend for your clients to try to stick within that window. But I don't think it's a case of people being hauled off to quarantine if their tests are not valid. That said, given the spike in COVID, sadly, in our country, I think at this time I would highly recommend that you do, if you do have guests going to Zim, to use a testing service that does guarantee that 24-hour turnaround window, like Gretchen did with the COVID consultants. You don't really want to roll the dice right now with free testing. I was tested a few weeks ago or a month ago, and a free testing here in Seattle, and that turned around in 12 hours. I think, Gretchen, you've used free testing in Denver, and Kim, I know for this trip you guys did that for your testing, but that was a few weeks, if not a month or more ago, and times have definitely changed, unfortunately, due to the spike in COVID. So right now you do want to use a service, and there are other ones, but based on your experience, Gretchen, and others in the industry, the COVID consultants really seem to have it pretty well dialed in. I know there's a nasal test, which is the picture there. There's also a sputum test, which I think, again, both are PCR, so both would be valid as far as I'm aware. The nasal test seems to be one that more countries around the world are endorsing, so maybe best to also stick with that. Cost-wise, Gretchen, I think it was $219 plus shipping and tax, so around 235-ish total. So that's not inexpensive, but it's for the security of it, and the peace of mind, and considering what you're already spending to get to Africa, it's kind of a small price to pay. And then maybe Kim and then Gretchen, just talk about your feeling of safety while flying. What was the flight experience like for you guys flying from North America via Addis Ababa and then down to Victoria Falls? So Kim?
Yeah, I felt very safe. Like Gretchen, I, even before COVID, was one to wipe down all my airplane surfaces. So I continued that. With 6 of us traveling, we sort of divvied up who brought what. So we had wipes and spray, and probably went a little bit overboard. But it certainly gave us peace of mind. I also have never been one to use airplane pillows and blankets because of some insider information I had received at a point earlier on in my life. So I certainly didn't use those, but that's nothing new for me. Yeah, we felt safe. We did end up having a lot of space, a lot of empty seats on the flight. So didn't feel like we were too close to anybody, anyone that wasn't in our traveling group or anything. And ultimately, I mean, we took that extra precaution to wipe everything down, but I feel like Ethiopian did a good job. They came through the cabin on the long haul flights and disinfected. So I felt very safe traveling. And then once we got to Imvelo, beyond comfortable with the measures that they took.
Gretchen, maybe if you could just talk a little bit about your experience on the ground in Zim as you arrived a few days early. And well, actually, first, before we get to that, let's just chat briefly about the specifics of entry. As we said, the negative PCR test is required within 48 hours of arrival. There is a screening and health questionnaire. I don't know if either of you were asked for that and had to fill it out. And was it checked on arrival in both Harare and Vic Falls?
It was checked for me in Harare, yes.
Yeah, not only was it checked, actually, they filled it out for us. They wanted to ask us questions, look at us, take our temperature, that sort of thing. So it was very interactive, and it felt very thorough.
And then if you or your guests are showing symptoms, or if for whatever reason they don't have a test, they decided to roll the dice, or their test is expired and they decide to enforce that 48 hours arrival, there is testing available on site at Victoria Falls Airport, done by Lancet, which is a very reputable healthcare provider in Southern Africa. Cost is approximately, they're saying $60, but we've heard up to $100. So good to have at least $100 in USD in cash available for that. And they are promising a 2 to 3 hour turnaround where you would be isolated basically at Victol's airport waiting for those results. So that is, a fail-safe last resort. If there is a positive test, then you or your guest would then have to go into quarantine at their own cost. Some other good news around that, again, worst case scenario, 2 of Imvelo's camps are actually designated as COVID quarantine centers. Jozibanini is one of them, very remote camp in southern Hwange, and then a private camp owned by Mark Butcher in the Ngamo area is also designated as a COVID quarantine center. It does require a nurse and a police officer to be with you quarantining throughout your stay there. I guess the police officer so you don't run away and into the community. So again, knock on wood, hopefully we'll never have to deal with that, but a little bit more peace of mind that should the worst case scenario happen, your guests, assuming they're not symptomatic, they can actually go on a quarantine safari, if you will, at 2 different places in Hwange. So there's Gretchen on I'm not sure where this was. I think it was Denver maybe, or Addis Ababa.
It's the United Lounge in Denver.
Okay. So briefly, Gretchen, your experience of flying and then your experience on the ground in Zimbabwe once you arrived in Victoria Falls, as far as protocols go and your general feeling of safety.
Sure. Look, I feel like it was very possible to social distance in the airport. Actually, all of the airports. Heathrow was a little crowded, but it was still entirely possible. As with anywhere, I think you will get people that have their masks under their chin or have them off to eat or whatever it is. For me, it was really important to realize that I was in control of my safety, wearing my PPE and being dedicated to it and making sure that I wash my hands frequently and all that sort of thing. And once that kind of sank in, I was very comfortable. There was enforcement largely on the airplanes for mask wearing. I would say domestically, there were more challenges than there were internationally, which is unfortunately not a shock. And then, even on the United flights, they handed us wipes to wipe down our seating area and the vents and things like that. So I feel like there's definite care taken, and there's definitely, the airlines are in a routine now. So it's second nature.
And then Victoria Falls, Gretchen, you arrived several days early ahead of the rest of the group. You were met by John Lang, the manager at Zambezi Sands, and an Imvelo tour leader, as well as by Bronwyn from New Frontiers, who, for those of you that don't know, New Frontiers does have a full-time representative based in Vic Falls, and there she is on the left, next to Gretchen, Bronwyn. I should have gotten her last name pronunciation before the webinar, but I didn't, so I'm not even going to try. It's a very interesting. I don't know if it's Afrikaans last name or what, but it's a doozy. But she is based in Vic Falls full time and was there to greet Gretchen. Then Gretchen, you were able to spend a couple of days with her, or a day with her in the falls. So talk a little bit about that experience being greeted by Bronwyn, about her role, about some of the stuff that you guys talked about, and then just the general vibe in the town, as well as then, as you can see, at the deserted Victoria Falls rainforest in the lower left there.
Yeah, well, there's nothing like being greeted by a friendly and familiar face when you walk out of the airport after a 40-something hour journey. So that was actually a real treat. And, you know, it's a early afternoon arrival into Vic Falls. And so Bronwyn collected me and took me over to Ilala Lodge so I could freshen up, take a quick shower. And then we, within, I'd say 2 hours, we were out on the Zambezi on a cruise, which was amazing. Ilala is great. You know, everything in Vic Falls, well, Vic Falls town is about 30 minutes from the airport. But, you know, it's a quick trip, and to get into Ilala and have a hot shower, you know what it's like after a trip. Ilala is really nicely located in that it is probably a 8-minute walk to the falls, and also you're walking distance to much of what's in town. There are restaurants open, limited hours. Of course, Ilala is also serving really good food, oh, by the way. But town is extremely quiet, and the falls themselves are also extremely quiet. I think the thing I noticed the most during my visit was the absence of things. Anyone that's been to Vic Falls knows that familiar sound of helicopters overhead all day long. None of that, almost none of that. I heard maybe one or two the day I was leaving. And then no people at the falls, no boats when we were out on the cruise. I mean, it's hard to picture Vic Falls this way. It absolutely knocked my socks off, because this is a very desirable tourist destination, probably the biggest adventure capital of Southern Africa. It is chock-a-block with people all the time, and we had it to ourselves. You can see town there on the right. It's just locals, you know, people out doing their grocery shopping, which, mind you, I went into a grocery store. Mask was checked, temperature checked, the whole bit. And it's just routine for everyone. We popped by the refurbed Lookout Cafe, which you can see there on the left. Top is sort of inside the dining room, and then that's the view on the bottom. And we were a little bit early, but they are open, but not crowded, as you can see. But it's looking very smart and very beautiful, and is a great place for your clients to go. It just, it boggles the mind to go somewhere like Victoria Falls and to be one of a handful, if not the only tourist there. It's obviously not going to last, but it is a truly magical experience to see the falls without jockeying for position to get photos or kind of queuing along to get to the next viewpoint. It's pretty exceptional.
And Kim, I think you had a similar experience while visiting Vic Falls with your group on the tail end of the trip. You were the only 6 in the entire rainforest, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we had to rush through, so we had about an hour there, but we never saw anyone outside of our group.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah. Hopefully the truly a once in a lifetime experience for you guys. Never before, and hopefully never again will it be this way. A question for you, Gretchen, from Mark about the staffing situation at a lot of the hotels that you were at, as well as some of the cafes. Are they still fully staffed, like Vic Falls Cafe or Vic Falls Hotel? I know you went to the Three Monkeys, which is a local favorite for lunch one day. What's the staffing looking like?
Look, I couldn't tell you if the full staff is working. What I can tell you is that everywhere I went, I was exceptionally well cared for. I was pampered. Service was quick, friendly, efficient. People were masked. So like I said, I can't tell you if every lodge has every person working. I doubt that they do, but they certainly have more than enough people to give tourists the experience that you're expecting them to have when they're there.
And in terms of protocols going on the Sundowner cruise, as you did with Ilala with the Rikanye Sundowner cruise, which I'll go back to here, some beautiful pictures from you there. And then going into the falls, rainforest, going into hotels, you know, what are the general protocols in place?
Every single place that I entered, my temperature was taken unequivocally everywhere throughout the trip, including in Imvelo's lodges. Hand sanitizer before entering a boat, a vehicle, a hotel, anything. Ilala Lodge, in fact, had a shoe sanitizing station for the way in. So extremely thorough protocols. The falls themselves also took names and details to for contract tracing purposes. So I felt like it was extremely thorough everywhere that I went.
Okay, a really good question here that we were going to get to in some capacity later, but we'll go ahead and cover it now from Robin. I'm curious how the locals truly feel about travelers now. Is there an underlying desperation for the income, but also a concern for the local safety and well-being? How are the medical facilities in Zim, which I can touch on in a minute? Are they over capacity or well prepared and doing okay? What impressions did the both of you get as far as that concern about, do locals really want tourism right now, or are they just kind of grinning and bearing the arrival of tourists despite being afraid of what tourists could be bringing? Kim, do you want to just talk about your impressions from Hwange in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely got the impression that they, the locals, the staff, and then when we did the village visit, that everyone was genuinely thrilled to see us. It had been many months, I think, since they had seen international guests. And certainly there were safety precautions in place everywhere. I mean, even when we were doing our village visit before we went to the market, they had set up a hand washing station before we went into the market. Of course, everyone had masks on, and we even sort of limited the amount of money that was being exchanged, limited it to doing one transaction as opposed to individual transactions. So I can say that I genuinely felt like they were happy to see us.
Gretchen, or your impressions?
I would totally echo that. The excitement about the return of tourism is palpable. People are thrilled to see the trickle of tourists coming in. To Kim's point, again, the protocols are far more thorough than anything I've ever seen anywhere in the United States. And it's kind of old hat, and after a day you don't really notice it, but it is absolutely adhered to everywhere. I only got the impression of excitement at our visit everywhere that I went.
And Robin, we're also going to be sending out in our next newsletter, as well as on our YouTube channel. Actually, the videos are there on our YouTube channel now, but we'll be publishing them on Instagram, a series of 4 different videos that we're calling Voices of Zimbabwe. We actually did publish one earlier while Gretchen was in Victoria Falls from one of the guides that she had the pleasure of spending some time with at Vic Falls River Lodge. His name was Blessing. And then we do have a video from the headman of Ngamo Village in Hwange, Johnson Nube, where he talks about the current situation amongst the villages and, their impressions and desires to have tourism returning. So look out for those as well. And I can always send you, if you email me, I can send you a link to those videos. But those are, firsthand coming from local Zimbabweans about their feelings about the lack of tourism and their desires for tourism to return, of course, always with safety protocols in place. And we'll show you some pictures in a minute of the protocols that were in place for Gretchen and Kim's visit to the local villages near Imvelo's lodges. As far as the medical facilities, they're not overrun. From what I'm hearing, there has been a recent spike in COVID, actually in Zim, largely due to the varsity schools and universities going back in session. That's mostly in Harare and Bulawayo, to the 2 larger cities. In Bulawayo, according to Mark Butcher, who lives there, the COVID ward recently that he heard from friends of his that are doctors had 2 patients. So plenty of beds there. COVID is not nearly the the thing that it is, for lack of a better term, that it is here in the States. Quite honestly, from what I'm hearing from most of my African contacts, more people are dying from other things like starvation and other diseases than they are from COVID. And I think, again, watching our Voices from Zimbabwe series, you really hear that being reinforced. The country is relatively well prepared. They do have world-class medical facilities on the private level in both Victoria Falls as well as in Harare and Bulawayo. So there is great medical care there, despite what I think sometimes is the misperception of Westerners about medical care in Africa. So just moving on to Harare. Kim, you did spend a few hours in Harare with your rebooked flights through there, but no, we're going to head off to Hwange and get into the safari that you guys experienced. And it was a very patriotic affair, both for Gretchen there being picked up by Butch in Vic Falls before they headed down to Bomani a day or two early to then greet Kim and her group arriving there on the right to Labudi airstrip near Jozibanini camp. And Kim, you mentioned you could see the American flag from the air, from the Cessna as you guys were flying in. Yep. What was that for your group? Just give us the group's impressions of flying into the super remote airstrip, seeing the American flag. Again, 5 of the 6 of you first-time Africa safari goers. What did that feel like as you were flying in and arriving?
Well, again, like, Gretchen sort of said, after a 40, however, I don't even know how many hours the trip ended up being, but it's so nice to reach your final destination. And to see Sibs there with the flag on the truck. My dad is a very proud Army veteran, so he was just thrilled to see the flag, and they sort of kept it displayed all week. So it was just the perfect African hospitality welcome that we, it was just at the end of that long journey, it was exactly what we needed to see. And then my aunt in the other plane swears that she saw elephants flying in. Nobody else saw them. She says she did. And she was just giddy when she got out of her plane. So it was a really fantastic meeting.
Well, we'll say she definitely saw them.
Yeah.
There are 50,000 of them in Hwange. So, your chances are pretty good. You throw a diamond into Hwange, you might hit an elephant. Let's look at the itinerary that you guys did. Starting off with 2 nights at Jozibanini camp, very, very far south of Hwange, the most remote camp in Hwange, probably the most remote camp in Zimbabwe, one of the most remote in Southern Africa. 2 nights there, then over to Bomani and Camelthorne in the southeast corner for 2 nights each. If you're planning an itinerary with Imvelo, you wouldn't book both Bomani and Camelthorne. They're in the same exact area. They're about 10 or 15 minutes from each other, but both very different camps, which again, we can go into in another webinar. But you guys got to experience both just from a travel industry perspective to see what each one was like. But the experience is in terms of the activities are very similar, if not exactly the same in that southeast corner. And then up to Nahimba via the wonderful Elephant Express safari train, which we'll talk briefly about, up to Nahimba for the last 2 nights. I put this picture in because this is kind of what Jozi looks like. There is no main lodge. This is your main lodge around the campfire. I'd love to get, starting with Gretchen, your impressions from, being on safari, in these times. And, just the idea that, travel is more stressful. Getting there is more stressful, certainly right now. You guys can both speak to that, having your flights changed and the number of legs that you have to go through and the steps you have to go through to get there. But once you get on safari, I'd love, Gretchen, for you to just tell us about, was it worth it, going all that way? Was it worth it to be on safari, and what things were different, what things felt the same? Again, just generally how the experience feels like in these times.
So I just have to correct one thing, Tad. We actually had 3 nights at Jozi.
Ah, you did. See, I knew you would point that out. Jealousy meters going up.
I have to say, I think you said the same thing. Jozi is one of my favorite camps in Africa. It's so remote, and to go from, now I had a couple days in Vic Falls and a night at Bomani on the way down, but to kind of go from the constant worry of COVID to, oh, hang on, I can relax. I'm out in the bush. Like it's like 1,000,000 pounds coming off of your shoulders. And it's somewhere between not wanting to take it for granted, but you slide into that relaxation so easily. And that gift of having other people caring for you, other people helping to take care of you. Just, I mean, I don't know about you. I haven't had a lot of people caring for me over the last 9 months. My husband is wonderful, but you know, I've made 750 meals during that time, like everybody else has. So to have dinner cooked for you or a drink brought to you is a whole new level of a treat, beyond what it is even on a normal safari. And just to be outdoors, I think, especially as we're heading into this North American winter, you know, it's going to be 65 here in Denver today and snowing tomorrow night. To be able to be outside 18 hours a day is a gift, and to be neck deep in nature it's a real balm for all of the things that we've all been through for the last 9 months. I hope I'm doing it just even the tiniest bit of justice, because it's almost hard to put into words the relief and the joy that comes from getting out and going on safari.
You're doing a lot of justice, Gretchen. And Kim, as a Africa-phile as well, you know, you've been to Africa 5 times in the last 2 years or year and a half, I think, even twice this year, which is saying something. And then I'd love to hear how you felt about the experience, you know, getting through the travel part and being on safari, but then also, probably more importantly, for your guests, your 5 friends and family, first time in Africa, you know, what was the experience like for them? And would you say that, you know, I mean, obviously they were pretty lucky to have this level of exclusivity, but did you emphasize how lucky they were, and what were their, you know, wide-eyed impressions from being on safari in these times?
Yeah, absolutely. 150%. Yes, it was worth the little bit of a hassle and the challenges of the COVID testing and the flight reschedule and everything. That did give us some challenges on the front end, but once we landed and got to Jozibanini and had the next 9 nights there in Hwange, it was worth every little bit of hassle we went through at the beginning. And I would just like to echo that, you know, Imvelo went above and beyond to help. You know, a couple days before we left, when that flight was changed, they moved mountains for us, for our group. So the level of service was fantastic. So for the rest of my group, the other 5, their first trip to Africa, certainly my husband knew how much I had sort of fallen for Africa and knew that it wouldn't be his one and only trip. But I think the other 4, you know, and a lot of Americans, I think probably a lot of you can attest to this with your clients, a lot of Americans know that they want to go on safari, but they think it's going to be a once in a lifetime type of trip. So certainly the other 4, I think they thought this was going to be, you know, their one bucket list trip to Africa. And they all just absolutely loved it, have not stopped raving about it, and are already talking about when we're going to go back. So certainly I think that the experience, you know, it was a treat. We're never going to probably get that level of exclusivity again in our lifetime. But you know, the elephant viewing in Hwange in general, but at Jozibanini in particular, is unlike anywhere else I've ever been. So we were fortunate because we had 3 nights there. We had 2 nights in the lookup blind here at Jozi, and I've never had an experience like that before. And I told them all, you know, how fortunate they were that this is your first experience, your first day in Africa, and this is the elephant experience you're having. Like, don't think that this is going to be the norm. So it was just a fantastic experience for everybody.
Gretchen, I went through a couple pictures here, just some of the just to give a little bit of a sense of place for Jozi here out in this most remote part of Hwange, the sunsets, and talk a little bit about your feet there on your star bed. And I think also just a bit about that that sense of place that you guys were able to experience. And we think maybe a trend as well is people wanting to spend more time, especially in these very remote places like Jozibanini, or even just in Hwange in general, versus trying to passport chase and do multiple countries on one itinerary. Obviously, multiple country trips right now are a lot more challenging with the COVID testing. You guys spent 8 nights in Hwange. It's a trend we're seeing more of. Talk a little bit about that experience of really settling down in a place for a longer period of time and kicking your feet up under the stars like you did here in this picture.
I think Hwange is particularly exceptional in its diversity of landscapes and experiences, and Imvelo's really nailed that down. You know, the camps are extremely different, both in feel and design and activities. You know, Josie is all about the elephants. Without a doubt, there's fantastic walking in this area. And then, as you can see by my happy feet right there, star beds, they're amazing. You know, the camp staff drag your bed out onto your beautiful little rustic wooden patio and veranda, and there's nothing between you and the whole rest of the African bush. It is elevated, just so you don't think you're like lion food or anything like that, but it's just magic, you know. And if you happen to wake up for a moment in the middle of the night and look up, you're seeing the entire universe. I had a moonless night when I was there, so the number of stars was astonishing. And, you know, you hear the elephants out at the pan drinking water. You hear hyenas calling to one another, lions calling to one another. It's just magical. And Hwange, 8-9 nights, no problem, no boredom, no repetitive. It really offers a lot between driving safaris, walking safaris, sleep outs, horseback riding, plunge pools. There's more than enough to keep guests happy without ever leaving the park. And to take that element of stress out of it, of, you know, airline transfers, airplane transfers, long distance vehicle transfers, that sort of thing, it really makes it a far more peaceful and easy holiday.
I think there is something to be said today as well for having one company handle the lion's share of your travels in a country, just knowing that the protocols are in place as they are with Imvelo throughout their properties, and that you're not going to be dealing with third parties, and that they do have everything well dialed in, and the peace of mind to know that that's the case for all of their properties. Whereas you may you may not know from one company or one camp to another. That said, you know, from all indications, everybody in Zimbabwe, as well as in Africa in general, all the good reputable companies, safari companies, are taking things very seriously and have really stringent protocols in place. I'm just going to go through here a few photos, and I'll ask you guys, maybe Kim, to start just giving a highlight from each of the camps. So talk about Josie. I think you've mentioned the Look Up Blind, maybe a wildlife highlight or an experience highlight from Jozibanini, and then from Bomani and Camelthorn, and then Nahimba, and then we'll go into the community visits after that, and then wrap up with a Q&A. So go ahead, Kim, as I scroll through some photos.
Yeah, so absolutely for me, elephants are my favorite safari animal. In my 5 trips, I had always wanted this elephant experience that we got 2 days in a row at Jozibanini and the Look Up Blind. It was fantastic. This little guy here has been affectionately named Peanut, and he was probably the #1 highlight. But just to look out, you know, the first day we were in the Look Up Blind, we waited maybe 30 minutes. And it had rained the day before, so our guide had told us that they weren't as desperate for water as they had been. So we waited maybe 30 minutes, then a couple strolled in, and by an hour later, you couldn't count how many elephants were there. It was insane. The next day, I mean, there were so many, you just couldn't count them. So fantastic experience in the Look Up Blind at Josie. Then on to Bomani, gorgeous setting. I loved the tents at Josie and the rustic, and it was my first bucket shower. But then to go from there to Bomani and these gorgeous tents was sort of a nice little change of pace. So the setting at Bomani was gorgeous. And the first night we were there, tons of wildebeest came into the watering hole, which was just I've never seen that sort of a setting, and the wildebeest running into the water like that. So that was fantastic. Camel Thorn, like you mentioned, is pretty close in proximity to Bomani. Couldn't probably be more different. Just a beautiful wooded setting. And we were lucky to get one of the rooms that had the plunge pool on the roof, which was the perfect way to spend that couple hours free time we had in the afternoon, to go up to the plunge pool after our in-room spa treatment, of course, to go up to the plunge pool there. And of course, fantastic game viewing. We saw a couple different pairs of mating lions during our 4 nights in this area. And then lastly, Nahimba, just the highlight. I mean, again, Nahimba's, I think, known for the elephants, and I was sort of prepared for it, but I had never had dinner, with elephants drinking from the pool, so close to us. So really, for me, they're they're the elephants as we're dining. That was just a highlight. I mean, I like food, and I like good food, and if, like Gretchen said, having someone else cook for me for the first time in months is nice, but I was almost too distracted to eat dinner because there was elephants that close to us. So if I had to go back and pick, I don't know that I could choose a favorite because the experience each.
And Gretchen, how about you? Highlights from each of the different camps. And as you point out, all of the camps are so different. And as Kim, you really well illustrated there the differences between the camps. It's kind of the diversity of the park, the diversity of the camps, the diversity of the wildlife between all these different parts of Hwange, a 5,000 square mile park. So, as you guys have so rightly said, it's not a lot of repetition between the experiences, between the wildlife, between the camps. Gretchen, anything stand out for you? I know some of those pictures of the windy lions on the Ngamo Plains, for me, just looked like that was a pretty special experience. But what else?
That was absolutely beautiful. Kim really covered a lot of the wildlife sightings. Also the sable and the roan, as you can see there, that was amazing. The cheetah down there is Miss Rhea. She is the namesake of my tabby, my enormous 19-pound orange tabby, who was sick while I was gone, and I was pretty distressed about it. And Butch, we saw this cheetah. They realized she was new and hadn't been identified and named, and we took a bunch of shots of her so she could be identified, and she is now Rhea, after my cat Rio. So that was incredibly special for me as well. I would also add some of the things when we were at Josie the first night. There was the most incredible electrical storm maybe that I've ever seen, and how big the sky is down there. You can just see everything. And so we're eating dinner, and this storm is blowing in, and the lightning is flashing like across the sky. And it was just incredibly dramatic. And we made it all the way through dinner, but had to run for our tents for dessert, which was pretty awesome. And like sleeping under canvas during a rainstorm is fantastic. Another day when we were at Bomani, we did have another spectacular thunderstorm while we were out on the vehicle, which was pretty awesome. And so we had to hoof it quickly back to camp. And then we got to watch it from the main tented area, which was pretty cool. We saw a lightning strike. I mean, it was just all the drama that African weather has to offer. And as Kim pointed out, the animals at the water hole at Bomani are spectacular. That herd of wildebeest coming in was incredible. We had a herd of buffalo one day. Hwange delivers. You never know what you're going to see, but you're always going to see something. And of course, the elephants are mind-blowing. If you have clients that's their biggest priority, you'd be crazy not to send them to Hwange.
Yeah, one of the stats we often refer to when talking about Hwange is that, last year, maybe 2018, Hwange had approximately 50,000 visitors. That's in comparison to Kruger, in South Africa, which had 1.7 million. And Hwange has approximately 45 to 50,000 elephants. So there's quite possibly more elephants in Hwange, and certainly this year, way more elephants in Hwange than there are tourists. So if your guests are looking for an elephant experience or they're looking for an exclusive safari experience, that really does deliver. Just look on your screen. You know, Hwange is certainly that, and not at a premium price. The other big differentiator and unique selling point with Imvelo is their incredibly strong connection with the local communities. You know, they really say they're embedded in the communities. Camelthorn Lodge is actually built on communal land. It's a community-based lodge. The community is the landlords of for Imvelo for that particular lodge. Bomani, while not on community land, borders community land, and they have an equally as strong relationship with the local villages there. You guys and the community activities are something very important to the experience for any guest that comes to visit both Bomani and or Camelthorn. Obviously, this year that was a concern because of COVID, and as Robin brought up, just the questions about whether communities wanted visitors, and you know, visitors coming from abroad potentially bringing disease, and despite the COVID testing. So I think the protocols that were put in place seem to really have put everyone at ease, including the locals as well as the visitors. You guys were there, you got to experience it. Gretchen, can you tell us a little bit about that experience, being in the communities and the conversations that you had with local leaders? Like in the upper right there, there's Headman Johnson Nube and his wife. You're visiting their homestead. Talk about that experience and what what the impression was coming from the communities.
You know, it's very eye-opening. I knew that the communities surrounding Hwange were missing tourism because I know that it is a source of income for them. I also know that Imvelo do a huge amount in partnership with the local communities, things like the school feeding program. There's a clinic being built in Ngamo village so that people won't have to travel for extraordinary distances to get medical care. You know, they've got the Cobras anti-poaching unit, which again is funded by Imvelo and past guests and donors. So these are all areas where this partnership with Imvelo makes a huge difference. And when there aren't tourists, there isn't money coming in. You know, the local village market where you see some of Kim's family members down below on the left, that market brings in $22,000 a year to a couple hundred families that live in the area. And so this year it's brought in next to nothing. You know, we were the first visitors. That's the first time that market has been set up since February. And that is a not insignificant source of income. So to buy food, to pay kids' school fees, all those things, just there was no money coming in. So, you know, to hear from both the village headman as well as local residents and their excitement over having tourism begin to return, and their optimism for the future and their continued partnership with Imvelo was really encouraging. Also to see the work that the anti-poaching unit is doing is incredibly encouraging because everyone's heard the stories that poaching has increased around Africa as tourism has dropped. So the work that they are doing is incredibly important. And every single one of those men that you see there was recruited from the local community. They didn't take ex-military or experienced expat people. Those are all local guys that live around Hwange. So that's also another source of employment for these communities. It's a positive story on a good day. And in the kind of crisis time we are right now, it's an incredibly positive story, but it also really stresses how important tourism is to these communities and how ready they are to welcome people back.
Before we jump into Q&A and wrap up, so feel free to put in any more questions that you do have into chat or Q&A. Kim, I know that I believe Adam, your husband, and maybe your father as well, had a particularly, were particularly impressed by the Cobras, as Gretchen is talking about, the anti-poaching unit who deals with poaching patrols on the southern border of Hwange here, as well as the human wildlife conflict, which does go on within the villages, with elephants coming into the villages for crops, lions and cheetah and other big cats coming in for livestock. Could you tell us a little bit about their impressions and their discussions with the guys at the Cobras unit?
Yeah, absolutely. My husband is a former state park employee here in Michigan, so park experience on a smaller level, very briefly a ranger before he found his full-time job. And my father, like I mentioned, is retired military. He also worked as a police officer when he was younger as well. So I think my dad in particular felt right at home here. I think he probably asked more questions here than anywhere else. So I think, I mean, it was fascinating, of course, for all of us to hear what they've been doing, and you know, the statistics on the traps and things that they've removed, and how they're operating without those tourism dollars coming in. So I think that you know, it was fascinating for all of us, but particularly my dad really, I think, felt right at home in the environment with the anti-poaching unit. So it was a treat to be able to visit them.
And for those of you that are sending guests to either Bomani or Camelthorne, there is the opportunity to go and spend the morning like Kim and Gretchen and the group did with the Cobras, or spend a few hours at least with them, even to go on an, you know, an anti-poaching patrol early in the morning if your guests are interested in something like that. So, all right. So I think we'll wrap it up with putting Gretchen and Kim on the spot again to tell us in one sentence, you know, what the experience was like. If you can try to sum it up in a sentence, I know that's nearly impossible, but Gretchen, I'll start with you, and then Kim, you're next.
Okay.
I think I might actually use one word instead of one sentence, and it's bliss. Absolute bliss.
Kim?
I like that. And I struggle with one sentence, but really, it was the perfect exclusive wildlife experience and getaway to end this otherwise strange year.
Yeah, well said, both of you. All right, we've had a few questions that we've answered throughout the presentation. I did want to just cover very briefly. Oh, we didn't talk about the Elephant Express, so very quickly, the Elephant Express is Imvelo's exclusive safari train that connects their camps Bomani and Camelthorne in the southeast corner with the main camp area in Hwange, that then is a gateway to northern Hwange, whether that's Nahimba Lodge or another property in the north, or up to Victoria Falls. So it's a purpose-built train, as you can see, recently refurbished as well, and is looking really smart. It's about a 2.5, 3 hour experience. And the eastern border of Hwange National Park is actually this railway line that Cecil Rhodes put down in the turn of the 20th century, 1904. It opened from Johannesburg, Pretoria, up to Victoria Falls. And that was the year the Victoria Falls Bridge also opened to celebrate, I believe, Queen Victoria's Jubilee year. So that railway line has been there since the turn of the 20th century. And so Imvelo, and has demarcated the eastern boundary of the park since 1922, when Ted Davison, the first ranger, came to work in and began to lay out the boundaries of the park. So Imvelo uses it as a really unique and a super fun way to go between their camps, or between Victoria Falls and Hwange, and then their properties in the southeast corner. Real quickly, just in a sentence or two, Gretchen or Kim, what did you feel about the Elephant Express experience?
I absolutely loved it. This was obviously our first time on it. There was a lot of discussion about my husband and I renewing our vows on it at some point, which was sort of joking, but it would also be really awesome. So it was just a really unique experience to break up, you know, the game drives. I mean, they're great, but when you're on day 6 or 7, it's just a nice change of pace to get on this train and you know, be able to stop for wildlife as it's crossing the tracks in front of you. So it was definitely a highlight for all of us.
Gretchen, you've been on the Express a few times. Anything new that stood out to you this time?
I wouldn't say anything new, just the surprise of the things that you'll see from the train. There was a strong request from the guests to have a nice male kudu sighting, and of course the male kudu cooperated and came out of the forest and stood there and, you know, posed majestically and snap, snap, snap. Everybody got the photo they needed. And then we saw Sable, and, you know, it's such a special experience. And, you know, the guys driving the train have been doing it for 35 years. It just, it's got a very old world feel, and it's really special, and there's nothing else like it.
It truly is. That kind of feels like you're stepping back in time to that, you know, that intrepid era of exploration back at the turn of the 20th century. And of course, you're served as many, it looks like savannas and G&Ts or lion lagers or Zambezi lager if you prefer on the train, as well as lunch and snacks. And it's a lot more fun than bouncing around in a Land Rover, for 3 hours, quite honestly, transferring between camps. Instead of it being a transfer, it really does become an activity.
Okay.
All right, so we'll finish up with that great picture there from Nahimba. Jennifer, you had a question about the Nahimba deck, which I'll email you about, but yes, it has been redesigned. And I can send you some photos that Gretchen took of the redesign, just to make it a little bit more safe and a little bit more spacious, actually. And a couple of extra questions here. How is the food situation on international flights? It's a great question. Either one of you want to take that from your experience?
Sure. I
Gretchen?
mean, it's your option. Yeah. They're going to serve meals. The food was absolutely exactly what I would have expected. I chose to take my mask off, take a bite, put my mask on. Same thing with hydration. So just kind of whatever your comfort level is.
Kim, anything to add on your experience?
That was our experience pretty much as well. There was no shortage of food. They certainly delivered food frequently. We slept through a few of them, I think, but same with us. We would, take our mask off, take a bite, put it back on. Yeah, what you'd expect on an international flight, but certainly they provided quite a bit of options for us.
I heard a suggestion from another person in the industry. I think it may have been Brooke Berlin, where she recommended if you have guests or you yourself are concerned about mask removal when at the same time when people are eating together, to consider ordering a gluten-free or a vegetarian or a non-dairy meal, which, as you all know from travel internationally, those are generally speaking delivered prior to the regular meal, if you will. So in theory, everybody else would still be masked while you've received your meal and can eat mask-free. So that was kind of a good workaround if you're concerned about the removal of the masks. Dennis, thank you very much for those kind sentiments. We hope this was informative and educational and interesting and inspirational. I am freshly inspired and freshly jealous of your trip, as I've now said many times. And really appreciate you guys taking an hour of your time, and for all of you joining us to spend a whole hour to dive into what the experience is like right now. I'm traveling to Africa and specifically to Zim. We will send this out as a recording, so if you want to share it with friends or colleagues or clients, feel free. Any other questions, feel free to email me, and I can bring in Gretchen and Kim for anything I can't answer. And we just really appreciate that you're open to travel again to Africa. We're all hoping for a big recovery of the industry next year. And to all of you, just have a really safe and wonderful holiday season. Gretchen, Kim, thanks again for doing this. Thanks again for being the guinea pigs, the first Americans back to Imvelo's camp since COVID. I know it was a tough job, but I'm glad you were able to make it work and share your experience with us today.
Thank you.
It was a real privilege.
Bye-bye. Happy holidays, everyone.